Desperate times call for desperate measures, so Chip Caray brought the bird hat back on Saturday, and what do you know, it worked for the Cardinals at Wrigley. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you here on Saturday evening, August 3rd, 2024, as the Cardinals, well, they had their backs up against the wall entering Game 3 at Wrigley Field over the long weekend. The first two games didn't go their way. Game 3 does, and if you thought the Cubs stole Game 1 on Thursday night when Ryan Helsley blew the save, the Cardinals committed absolute thievery on Saturday afternoon as they come from behind to beat the Cubs 5-4. Plain and simple, the Cardinals stole this one. The way things began, you didn't think by the late innings that St. Louis would be in the game, let alone actually have a chance to win it going into the bottom of the ninth, and that's exactly what happened as Ryan Helsley gets his revenge for Thursday. A clean bottom of the ninth inning, 1-2-3 frame. And the Cardinals and their fans can exhale a little bit. The worst has at least been avoided this weekend at Wrigley. There will be no four-game sweep. But today on B-Schaeff Daily, we'll talk about Kyle Gibson's performance. Didn't start strong, but got there by the end. How important was that to the Cardinals ultimately completing this comeback? We'll talk about the crazy eighth inning in which the Cardinals scored the majority of their runs. And arguably the bird hat that made it all happen, Chip Caray wearing the Cardinals giveaway item. I love that he opened the game that way. I honestly didn't even see that until I got ready to sit down to do this podcast and was going back through the condensed game to grab a couple of things that I may have needed for the show and saw that the condensed game on MLB.com opened with Chip Caray in the bird hat. I heard the mention of it at the end of the game. He said, bird hat never fails, and I thought, oh, he must have the bird hat. I didn't know he opened the broadcast with it on his head. I had missed the very beginning of the Ballet Sports broadcast today. So I thought that was hysterical, and how fitting, right, to put it on the thumbnail to honor the bird hat and Chip Caray's commitment to the bit. Wonderful stuff. Cardinals get the win on Saturday. If you enjoy daily Cardinals content, this is the place to be. Subscribe to B-Schaeff Daily on Spotify or Apple Podcast. We do a podcast about the Cardinals every single day. The YouTube channel is where you'll find the podcast posted as well. YouTube.com/@bschaefer12. Give us a subscription. Check out the links in the description to the video as well. The Discord is free to join. Lots of Cardinals fans in there. Over 200 of your closest Cardinal fan friends. And we also have the YouTube membership if you would like to support my work on that level. Would appreciate you checking out the membership. Let's hop right in, though, and talk about Kyle Gibson's start this afternoon, because you have to sort of understand the context to get to the point of why the Cardinals were even in a position in the eighth inning to take advantage when the Cubs gave the Cardinals a massive gift, really a couple of gifts that ended up leading to a 4-4 tied score. But Kyle Gibson wasn't sharp at the beginning of this game for the Cardinals. He gave up 2 runs in the first inning, giving up the lead that the Cardinals had earned in the top of the first with Alec Burleson's home run, his 19th of the season. That was crazy, by the way, as well, because it was initially ruled a double on the field, that the ball had not gotten into the basket. And watching it live, I thought, there's no way that's not a home run. That's not the way that physics works. The ball bounced back up into the air and onto the field, which it could not have possibly done if it did not clear the threshold of the baskets there at Wrigley Field, because the basket literally juts out toward the playing surface. It just would have been impossible, barring it landing, I guess, like right on the wire edge of the basket and popping straight up. I don't really even know what the ground rule would be if that happened. It's just physically impossible for it to do so, because the wires are so thin that there's not really a consideration, I wouldn't think, for that. If I'm wrong, if that's happened before and the ball has bounced off the very front edge of a basket at Wrigley in that right field area and bounced straight back up and onto the field, somebody correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But I said, well, that's a home run. They're going to fix that really quickly. And they did, but Michael Busch fixed the problem that the Cubs had, which was they're trailing in the game. And he hit a home run for 2 runs in the bottom of the first to tag Gibson. And then the second inning was not a whole lot better for Gibby, as PCA, Pete Crow-Armstrong, had a triple that scored a run, and then he was able to score on a sacrifice bunt as the Cubs were playing a little bit of small ball there in the second. But it was almost as though the Cubs giving up and out there in that moment is something that helped to settle Kyle Gibson in, because he proceeded for the next 5 1/3 innings to not give up anything to the Chicago Cubs. Scoreless, got out of the rest of that second inning after the sacrifice bunt scored Chicago's 4th run. Innings 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, Gibby was efficient, he was strong, and he got the Cardinals through it in order to keep them in this game, quite honestly. He gives up 5 hits and a walk in the game. A lot of those came within the first couple of innings. 4 earned runs, all come within the first couple of innings. And Gibby, at the end of the day, gets through 7 innings. I'm pretty sure after the second, the Cubs only ended up with one more base runner against Gibby the rest of the afternoon, a 4th inning single, and that was it. So he really settled in and gave the Cardinals a chance. But the way that this was feeling sort of going into the last couple of innings, you figured it was going to be another one of those games where the Cardinals, maybe they get a run at the end, solo home run in the 9th sort of vibe and lose 4-2. That felt like a possibility. And you're looking back and saying, well, the accomplishment by Gibson, maybe it saved the bullpen, but it didn't actually do very much for the Cardinals toward getting them a win, and a win that they desperately needed after dropping the first 2 games in the series. It felt like the Cardinals were going to walk away from this one with another offensive output that leaves you shaking your head. We've seen the offense have a downturn recently, and even though the Cardinals win the game today, I still feel like that's largely applicable for what they were accomplishing throughout the bulk of this game. Jameson Taillon shut them down for the most part. Outside of the Alec Burleson solo shot in the first, he goes 6 innings and gives up just that one solo home run to Burley and was clean after the fact. And then Drew Smiley had a clean 7th inning, 1-2-3, and the Cardinals, not until the 8th, were able to find a way to scratch anything across. The number of innings that the Cardinals are having in this recent skid, where they just don't do anything offensively, ends up being a frustrating factor. Innings 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were pretty much just nothing doing. The Cardinals ended up with 9 hits for the game, but again, they're largely scattering those hits outside of what they were able to do in the 8th and 9th inning. Just not a lot of action on the bases, and sometimes the Cardinals do get that action on the bases. It came the other day with the 9 walks that they ended up getting in the loss to the Cubs 6-3. Like, there just has not been enough capitalizing on the opportunities they have, and arguably in this game, not enough opportunities to really force the issue. But the Cardinals ultimately get away with one. I mean, they were lucky to be able to claim this game when you look at what happened there in the 8th inning, even before the Arenado play, which if you want to use the game-tying swing as an indictment on Arenado and the way that he's seeing the ball right now and the way that he's playing, I don't really think that's unfair because he is still tremendously struggling, in my opinion, in some of those clutch situations to take a first pitch fastball, again, right down the pipe and get underneath it for an easy pop-up. Just jumps on a pitch that he doesn't jump on, right? He's swinging at it, but doesn't do anything with it that could be considered productive for the Cardinals. They just got extraordinarily lucky that a miscommunication, plain and simple, took place between PCA out there in center field and Nico Hoerner, the second baseman, going out on a ball. It was basically identical to the play that you saw in the wild card game back in 2012 between the Cardinals and the Braves. If you shift that action from left field, where it took place back in 2012, and nudge it to center field, that was the play, because Nico Hoerner was camped underneath this baseball. Granted, there were 2 outs in this situation and not 1. That's why there was no consideration of an infield fly. But genuinely, and I've always said this about that play in 2012, where Braves fans think I'm crazy, but they got that call right. Sam Holbrook got that call right back in the day, because the rule is with ordinary effort, can the infielder get camped underneath the baseball? And in 2012, Pete Kozma was camped underneath the baseball. He heard what he thought was Matt Holliday calling him off, which it was not the case. It was just an errant whatever he heard. Honest to God, it might have been Sam Holbrook yelling infield fly is the thing that Pete, to this day, that's kind of what I believe, is that Kozma heard something. He assumed it was Holliday in left calling him off, and it was actually, in my opinion, if I had to take a guess, without having gotten to talk to anybody that was involved in the play about this play before, I would guess that he heard infield fly and thought it, granted, is a weird place for an infield fly to be called, so it probably wasn't even remotely on Pete Kozma's mind in that moment. He thought, my left fielder is calling me off for this baseball. I better get out of the way. And Nico Hoerner had that exact same look to him today. I know that's like another 3-minute story that has nothing to do with the game today, but Cardinals fans, longtime Cardinals fans, know exactly what I'm talking about. That infield flag was a correct call. Braves fans don't like to hear that, but ordinary effort by Kozma today, ordinary effort by Hoerner, but there were 2 outs, so an infield fly was not a consideration. But Hoerner was underneath it. And in this case, PCA does call him off, and he just had no business doing it, is really the guy that I would blame for this play. He needed to be a little bit more aggressive. Like if this were a Cardinal play that had happened and had gone awry, we would be talking about it, obviously, from that perspective. So I'll pretend for a moment that you care what the Cubs' perspective on this play is. In my opinion, Pete Crow-Armstrong has to be more aggressive in the early portions of that route if he has any intentions of calling off Hoerner, which it should be the center fielder's ball generally. You could ask Michael Siani about, the similar play that happened with the Reds and Ellie De La Cruz earlier this season when Siani scored from third base because De La Cruz, the shortstop, went out to shallow center to catch it with basically his back to the infield. In that case, it's got to be the outfielder's ball that takes the aggressive route because he is leading toward home plate to throw home and try to cut the runner down with less than 2 outs. In this case, with 2 outs, it doesn't really matter who catches it. You just have to know that the guy that's going to be in the best position to do so makes the play. And normally, I think that would obviously be the guy coming in on the ball even still. It's not now that there's a factor of where you're going to throw the ball because there's 2 outs, but it's just an easier play for the guy that sees it develop in front of him rather than Hoerner, who has to go back on the ball and try to time up exactly where everybody is and where the ball is and make sure he doesn't stumble going backward. That's just a tougher play for a second baseman to make. I think Hoerner is doing the right thing by getting underneath the ball. He probably would have caught it. It was a rather routine play, just kind of in between the two of them. I think if PCA is going to make the effort to call him off at any point, he's got to be hauling ass a little bit more to put himself in position to know that he actually can call him off. It was just totally unnecessary for Crow-Armstrong to do that, but he's a younger player, and I think he got a little bit caught in between. That's why with the center fielder, man, you want somebody out there playing confidently, playing the quarterback of that defense. And in that case, Crow-Armstrong, who has all the tools, athleticism in the world, speed, everything you would want, he just, in that moment, I think was not, you kind of noticed the lack of experience a little bit because he did not play that like a veteran. He played it like the ball was playing him a little bit and honestly got too involved compared to what he needed to. And it ends up costing the Cubs, but saving the Cardinals bacon because at that point, the ball drops in, 2-run score. Even before that, as I was trying to allude to a little bit earlier, you had the play with Brendan Donovan chopping one over the third baseman's head, Isaac Paredes, but he was able to put a glove on it. And instead of just putting it in his pocket because he was so far up the line and it would have just been a sensational play to be able to get the out at first base in time, would have ended the inning. So I understand why he wanted to try to get BFD out at first base, but Donovan was going to make that play probably regardless. The throw was not remotely close, and it allowed, instead of it being you pocket the ball, it's 4-1, bases are loaded with 2 outs, and then you face Arenado up by 3 runs. It's now 4-2. You now move the tying run up to second base instead of being there at first base, and you have a much more stressful situation on your hands. It would have been stressful anyway for the pitcher. I believe it was Porter Hodge that was out there for this inning, and he's a young Cubs reliever who's actually done a pretty nice job this year, sub-3 ERA on the season. But he was out there for what I have to imagine is the Cubs' worst defensive inning of the season, because from the Paredes throw that then allows this little dinker by Arenado into center field to score the tying run. Like, if Paredes pockets the ball, that other play can unfold exactly the way that it did, which it probably wouldn't have because the infield's going to be positioned differently based on probably different guys on the base paths and everything like that. But even if it goes the exact same way and the Cubs flub it, I think there's a chance that PCA gets Brendan Donovan. I don't know that Donovan scores from first on that play. Now, he very well might. You can make the case that it should have been a gimme. It should have been a gimme for Arenado to be at second base, by the way, and he wasn't. He was probably loafing it down the line, which everybody kind of talks about this like it's this, big-time sleuthing. Look, I've caught Arenado doing something. Yeah, Arenado loafs it. I mean, he does it all the time. It's like it's not a secret. It's one of those things that certain players of veteran status are able to get away with relative to others. There have been players over the years that this has been a topic of conversation for, whether it's Arenado, whether it's Yachty, whether it was Albert, and with some of those guys, those guys, well, are Hall of Famers. Well, Arenado might be one someday too. And I think what those guys would usually do a pretty decent job of, but not always, the guys like Yachty and Albert, is that they would loaf it on most of the routine ones that they just didn't really have a chance to make an impact. But you'd see Yachty get on his horse, and you'd certainly see Albert get on his horse when it mattered. And I would argue that there have been a couple of cases with Arenado where you could say that this is one that maybe matters, and he even still has not shown that next gear. So I'm not blind to it, but it's not something that is necessarily, I think people, and I understand because you're a fan at home going, I want the Cardinals to be trying their best. They're my favorite team. I get it. But I just think it's not probably the most realistic thing to think that Ollie Marmol is supposed to grab Nolan Arenado by the collar and say, let me give you the what for. You pick your battles is the way that I would frame that. And I'm not saying that the coaching staff even always has to like it when players on the team aren't given 100% every moment of the season. But is there something to be said, I think, sometimes for veteran players conserving energy for the plays that matter the most? I think that might be the case. And by matter the most, I don't necessarily mean Game 7 of the World Series, but more so, is this a double play that it's going to be a step or two in either direction? I actually have a legitimate chance to beat it out or not. On those, like you want to see the guys trying to make an effort to save their team the out, to get the extra base, to do those little things. And, when you're the pop-up the last out of an inning and you're probably pissed off at yourself for another, bad swing, quite frankly, from Arenado. We've seen a decent number of those recently, and he's kind of, back in a spot where, especially with runners on base, I don't think he is in his best frame of mind right now, at least with the way that it looks at the plate. He did have a 2-for-4 day in this game. Granted, was credited with a hit on that because PCA didn't even get a glove on it, so you can't really call it an error. So it's a 2 RBI hit for Arenado. Had another hit in the game as well. But generally, with runners on, we've seen this weekend the swings he's taken, and we harped on the one from Friday for sure, that he had a 2-0 count, and I called it a bit of bad baseball to basically try to pull the ball that was 6 inches off the plate in a cutter and broke his bat in the process and kind of lazily flied out to left field. Those swings have not been his best, so you can understand why he might have some frustration in that moment. The point being, though, like, that's a spot where close game, if it is a tweener ball, you might be able to recognize that off the bat and anticipate that there might be a part of this play that you could have a role in and make sure to get to second base. But I also think there have been periods throughout the season where we have seen Arenado turn it on and take extra bases and do all of these things. Did it happen for a week or so and then it wore him out, so he stopped doing it? I don't know. I understand why it's a topic of conversation, though. I'm not going to just ignore it like it's not happening. It's happening. I just don't know that there's really, it's going to have to come from within Nolan Arenado at that stage of your career, at that stage of your salary, and it's going to have to come from within. And if you want to do it all the time, then you will, and if you don't, then you won't. It's going to come from either, and look, those are the sorts of things that maybe maybe a Tommy Pham does say, hey guys, here's how I do it 100% of the time, and can that be something that rubs off on other people? It's infectious type of behavior and personality. If he's giving it 100% every moment of every day, maybe that's something that can rub off on the other players. I don't know, but I do think Arenado should have been at second base in that spot because, frankly, that is one that matters. But at the same time, you're like, how many times does that pop-up not get caught? So that's kind of his thought process. Look, man, it obviously doesn't end up coming back to haunt the Cardinals because the next guy didn't get a base hit. But, yep, I saw it too, and that's really all I have to say about it. But let me know your thoughts. You're certainly entitled to say, yeah, he loafed it on that play. And I agree, but I don't think guys get burned at the stake for doing that, especially when they're making $30 million. It just sort of is part of the game, and if that's part of the reason that you as a baseball fan say, hey, I miss the old days when you wouldn't see that kind of stuff, I get it. I understand your viewpoint. It's just, I think, part of the era that we're in, that's sort of the thing that you're going to see from time to time, and you don't always get the most 100% efficient, optimal version of the game. That's really all I have to say about that. But in this case, the Cardinals do end up getting the better end of it as the 2-run score. They tie the game. Arenado's the hero driving in. He gets 2 RBIs for that. It's kind of crazy. A pair of 2-out RBIs. And look, you want to see him kind of get back to being himself at the plate again. He does have a 705 OPS, which is, higher than it had been at times this season. Goldschmidt's up to 687, although today was not his day at the office. 0 for 4 with 2 Ks. It seems like you can't have Arenado and Goldie going for very long at the same time. You might have a game or two where they overlap, but it's really been a story of one or the other is what you're going to get throughout this season. Gorman was another guy that you did not get going today. He was 0 for 4 with a strikeout. Tough day for Michael Siani offensively, and he also leaves the game injured, something else we're going to have to talk about. As of this recording right now on Saturday night, I do not have any insight on whether or not Michael Siani will require an injured list stint. However, because it is oblique tightness that he left the game for after 3 straight strikeouts, and it was asked, I believe, by Katie Wu in the postgame whether it was the final at-bat that he took, if that's what kind of alerted them to an issue, and that was at least what Ollie Marmol said after the fact. Now, maybe Siani was trying to grit through and hide through something that he had experienced earlier. It would have made a lot more sense if it was last night, Friday night, or afternoon, I should say, where something was going on with Siani, and that's why they would have taken him out of the game for Brandon Crawford. We had a fun time talking about that yesterday, but that didn't seem to be the indication from what they said post-game, at least from what I saw on Bally Sports in the post-game show. So we'll wait and see on Siani as far as his injury goes. But what it did do was set up when Nootbaar came into the game in center field as a defensive replacement. Tommy Pham ended up being, and by the way, Arenado down to the 6 hole today. Just something to note. We've seen those guys kind of bounce around in the lineup, and Donovan batting 5th was a way to break up the two right-handers, Goldie and Arenado. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Ollie has been willing to try to match and mix and do different things. So that's something else going on in the background of this game. But Nootbaar comes in, and he is now the 9-hole batter for the Cardinals when they get their shot in the 9th inning. Tommy Pham ropes one deep to left. Ian Happ crashes into the brick wall, because that's what it is at Wrigley Field. Yes, there is an invasive species of plant covering the wall. Those don't provide much padding. Ivy is not padding, and so it was kind of impressive the way that Ian Happ popped right back up after slamming his body weight into that wall. But the part that wasn't impressive, he wasn't quite able to hold on to the baseball. He had it in his glove seemingly for a moment, but pops out, and Tommy Pham ends up doing the thing that Tommy Pham does, and he makes sure to get third base on the play. And it's important that he does, because when Lars Nootbaar comes up, he's in that Siani spot. If you recall, it's very good fundamental baseball by Newt, coming in off the bench, hadn't batted all day, and just makes sure to get the Cardinals what they need, which is gets under the ball, serves it into the outfield just deep enough to score the run. And the Cardinals get that sacrifice fly a little, as Chip Carey and the Bird Hat would say, ABC baseball, as it's just what Lars Nootbaar needed to do. And it wasn't anything fancy. It's just what the situation called for. And it was good to see that little piece of fundamental baseball from the Cardinals. And perhaps even better to see Ryan Helsley come back and shut things down in the bottom of the 9th. It feels like we are so, especially against the Cubs right now, with the ERA coming into today above 9 for the season for Helsley against Chicago. We are so hyper-fixated on what every pitch looks like, and I was victim of it as well, going on Twitter saying, the sliders are catching too much of the plate to Paredes, because they were, but the fastball looked like it had some pretty good life to it today, and he threw it in some locations that he had a jam shot that was able to get an out on a 99-mile-per-hour fastball up and in. I think that was the soft liner to shortstop for the second out of the inning, and then the fly ball to center field. So he wasn't really missing bats today. The slider was not as sharp to my eye, but the fastball was good enough to be competitive and get the job done. The one time he really reared back for a fastball, the location wasn't there. He missed way outside, but he did, at least according to the game broadcast mile-per-hour chart. He goes 102 on his best fastball. I didn't check the StatCast for it, but Helsley had the inning that you needed to have to be able to kind of calm some of the fears about what the Cubs have been doing to him. And frankly, the Cardinals just didn't have the time today for a blown save in the 9th inning by Ryan Helsley. So Hells gets it done, his 34th save of the season. He's still one of the best closers in baseball. All the crap that was slung about Ryan Helsley the other day after Thursday's blown save was a little bit extra by some Cardinals fans. I understand the frustration, but they're in a spot now where they at least will leave this weekend series against the Cubs. Well, they didn't get swept, and that's not really a banner that I think they're ready to hang at Busch Stadium, but it is something. It's something more than nothing, especially with the state right now of the wild card race and all the teams that are involved in it. Even a team like the San Francisco Giants is not out of it after Blake Snell threw a no-hitter last night. That's something I don't think we mentioned on the podcast, but probably should have at least given it a cursory glance. Congrats to Blake Snell on what I believe was his first ever complete game, first ever, obviously shutout if he hadn't thrown a complete game, and his first no-hitter as well. After winning a Cy Young, some people were reacting, saying he's never accomplished any of these things, but basically his postgame said, well, now y'all can't say anything about it because I've done all of them, so leave me alone. It's basically, I think, a direct quote of what Blake Snell said, which is kind of fun. I like Blake Snell because I think he's enough of like a younger generation type of mentality where like he's on Twitch playing video games and he's talking with internet slang and he's, very online sort of thing. So I don't know. I can kind of appreciate that about a professional athlete of Blake Snell's caliber. Just like, all right, I did the thing that y'all said I couldn't do, so leave me alone. I don't want to hear about it anymore. But the Brewers, when it comes to the NL Central race that we should probably spend more time talking about than Blake Snell's video game habits, the Brewers lost today and the Cardinals won. So the Cardinals climb back one game closer to their threshold of catching the Brewers. 5.5 games right now behind Milwaukee for the Central. Cardinals are 2 games still out of a wild card spot because the Mets and Arizona Diamondbacks both won today, so no ground gained there, but did pick up a game on the Padres, as the Cardinals are technically trailing the Padres as well. The Padres are out of a playoff spot by the decimal of a percentage point, I guess it would be, because they have played 2 more games than the Mets and have split the difference on those 2 games. So they're both at a .532 winning percentage, but if you go even further down the decimal list, the Mets currently have the tiebreak in terms of that. But the Cardinals are still in striking distance. The Pirates are behind you, though. The Giants are behind them. Even you could say the Reds and the Cubs. Like, if you'd have lost to the Cubs a bunch this weekend, gotten legitimately swept in the series, I think it would have ended up being that the Cubs would have been knocking on the door, basically, of 500 for the season. They would have been 55 and 58 after today, so 56 and 58 after theoretical win on Sunday. They would have. They're not technically out of it. They're only 6 games out of a wild card spot, but they have, the whole National League yet to hop over, other than the Rockies, Marlins, and Nationals, who I think we can by now say the Nationals are out of it. But anyway, the Cardinals still have ground to pick up, and what kind of team are they? I think is still sort of a question that we're all asking ourselves. When you think about the way that the offense has left opportunities on the table, especially in this weekend series against the Cubs, like, I know that we can't overreact to each and every game of what a team's offense is or isn't, because very well can change within a couple of days, and then we're going, oh my gosh, they're so great. That's what we said against the Rangers, right? They had 2 games to finish off that series post-Tommy Pham acquisition where the Cardinals just seemed like they were on top of the world and nobody was going to be able to slow down this freight train that was the St. Louis offense. And then, you play a couple more games and you're like, okay, maybe it's not exactly what type of a guarantee we thought it was going to be for the Cardinals to suddenly be this force offensively. And look, I'll give you the numbers for the year, but it really seems like it's been a roller coaster with lots of ups, lots of downs for the Cardinals. And where it's landed them is 18th overall in OPS across Major League Baseball with a .698 OPS on the season. If you're ranking it by runs scored, the Cardinals are even a little bit further behind the pace at 466 runs scored in 111 games. So that's a pace of a little bit more than 4 runs per game, about 4.2 runs per game, which feels like it's gone up from previously in the season. But that's 22nd in baseball in terms of total runs scored. Now, if you went by runs per game, I think it's about the same ranking, but everybody's played a little bit of a different game, and I never remember to sort it by that. But anyway, the Cardinals are a bottom half offense if you look at it on the scope of the full season. And we know that started being, bottom 5 for the longest time, and then they were able to kind of round back into somewhat of a decent form. Their post-Mother's Day and for the month of June was pretty strong for them offensively. But now are they sort of at risk of going back in the other direction? I think maybe not, because they still find a way. Like, they scored 5 runs today, but they took advantage of basically something they had no choice but to take advantage of because the Cubs dropped the ball. They did have a very nice little 1-2 punch with Tommy Pham and Newpar in the 9th inning, but that didn't involve any other players. So you can't necessarily say, well, that's a cohesive proof that the lineup is turning things around. Cardinals have scored 37 runs in their last 7 games, but that's going to bake in the 2 really good ones against the Rangers to keep them within the top 10 in the league in the stat. But even I'll go back to the last 15 days. The Cardinals are tied for 6th in baseball with 68 runs scored. And I'll even take a look at the last 30 days. The Cardinals are still 6th in baseball over the past month, basically, with 124 runs scored. So the offense has definitely even still been better than it was for the first month and a half of the season or so. And the .738 OPS over the last 30 days keeps the Cardinals in 12th in baseball in that category. So, like, they're doing okay offensively. The season log numbers are going to lag a little bit behind, but if they continue to be kind of a 10 through 15 offensive team, which is not what we asked them to be at the beginning of the year. I said they had to be top 10 and handily so, I thought, if this team was going to be able to win with the type of pitching staff that they were plotting to put together. But what can the Cardinals be? I think it's a matter of consistency offensively. But don't overlook what Kyle Gibson did today either, because I understand people get frustrated when a guy gives up a bunch of runs early because it kind of feels like the game's over. But today was a prime example of how that's not always the case. The Cardinals were able to battle back, but it doesn't happen if Kyle Gibson doesn't shove it for 5 innings after he gives up those 4 runs. So 7 innings, 4 runs, it doesn't look very sterling for the ERA, but it ends up mattering in the scorebook as even maybe one more floppy inning from Gibson between innings 3 and 7, and I don't think the Cardinals end up winning this baseball game the way that they do. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Cardinals as things stand, where this offense is, and where you think it can go as we move forward, and your perception of maybe the job that Kyle Gibson did today. Wasn't a strong start, but was the finish the Cardinals needed. All that being said, let's go ahead, and before we get out of here, we should go down on the farm. It's time to go down on the farm. Brought to you by Hastings Layers Premium Eggs.
You'll be happier than a jackass eating thistle.
Huh? The action across the Cardinals minor league system today was hot and heavy, and it honestly still is. As I'm recording this, I don't think all the games have even gone final, but we'll give you what we have because I'm getting this out of the way a little bit earlier on Saturday night so I can actually go to bed this evening. Isn't that a novel concept? As I record this, the Cardinals, or I should say the Redbirds of Memphis, are trying to close down the Durham Bulls in the bottom of the ninth. Ryan Ludus currently on the mound. Hopefully he picks up his 6th save of the season for the Redbirds. The Redbirds leading at 3-2. They came up with a couple of runs in the 8th inning. What was notable about this one, and I had mentioned the Michael Siani oblique, there's not much to say as of yet other than the two players that we conceivably could see as a possible replacement nominee for Michael Siani if he ends up needing to go on the injured list, which would really be unfortunate for the Cardinals. But if it needs to happen, two guys that weren't in the lineup tonight for Memphis, Victor Scott II, who's been on a tear recently for the Memphis Redbirds, but is he really ready to make his way back to the big leagues? We'll see. The other name was Jose Fermin, that I thought was notable because even though he's not really an outfielder, he has played some outfield. I talked about that a little bit after the All-Star break, that they have been putting him into those spots at times, maybe just to see if he could do it, maybe anticipating they were going to trade away two outfielders at the deadline, Tommy Edman and Dylan Carlson. That was kind of why we talked about that around the All-Star break and said, hey, this is something that's happening, keep an eye out. It ended up coming to fruition that the Cardinals, before July 31st, traded away two of those outfielders that could have served as organizational depth down the stretch. Now we don't see the quite the depth that we thought the Cardinals had there. Matt Koperniak, I thought, would maybe be an interesting candidate with an 881 OPS down there in AAA this year if the Cardinals need to make a move because he could play some center, has done it for Memphis this year. But he was in the lineup tonight, went over 3. Jordan Walker was in the Memphis lineup tonight, went 3 for 4 with a run scored, so that's good to see. Thomas Tajasi, if you were hoping to see him, nope, he started at second base and hit a home run in the game tonight for Memphis. So, all of those guys are playing, which doesn't mean they couldn't be called up if they decide, the Cardinals are probably aware by now what they need to do with Siani. But keep your eyes and ears peeled for social media posts by anyone in the know with Victor Scott, or you probably wouldn't get a post on Jose Fermin. But for Scott, I think that information would get out there, and maybe it happens before you listen to this podcast, so I won't spend much more time talking about it. As far as Siani goes, though, it is a real bummer if the Cardinals end up losing him for a period of time. He has been one of their hottest hitters. I've talked about the 900 OPS the last week or so. Last 15 games, he's well above an 800 OPS. Even for the last 30 games, he's OPSing in the upper 700s. So he has really turned it on, and today was a rough one for him and probably was battling through that injury a little bit. Unfortunate if he has to miss time, but when it's an oblique, I wouldn't be surprised if he does have to go on the 10-day IL. You just have to hope it's not very severe because he has turned into a very valuable player for the Cardinals. Without him, I think that the call-up could end up telling you the story about, if there is a call-up necessary, what the Cardinals plan to do with that outfield. If it's Victor Scott, they'll probably call him up and play him a lot. He basically slots in directly as a replacement for Siani. If they go a different route because they feel like they've got enough outfielders on the roster already, let's say it's Fermin, or, I wouldn't be surprised. I guess I would be somewhat surprised, but it should be mentioned that Ivan Herrera was not in the Memphis lineup tonight either. And he, could have been DHing, could have been catching, and was not in their lineup. He is on the 40-man roster. Fermin's on the 40-man roster. Victor Scott, obviously, is on the 40-man roster. I would think that Herrera would be an interesting option just to have another righty off the bench, because if Tommy Pham is going to be playing a bunch, that sort of negates the fact that you had the righty option off the bench. You could have Herrera out there. You could decide to play more Donovan at second base and still have enough outfielders between Burleson, probably going to mean Nootbaar in center, and then figuring out what you want to do with left field, whether it is Donovan on the days that Gorman plays at second, and then Donovan could play left field, or if Donovan's going to play second base, Tommy Pham's certainly going to have somewhere where he needs to be. So between Pham, Nootbaar, Burley, that's 3. Donovan plays left field sometimes. One of the other guys DHs. You have to bake in that Contreras is going to DH a few times per week as well. My point, though, is like you've got enough bodies to go around. If they're comfortable with Nootbaar playing center, which I know they haven't been historically, but they may not have a choice unless they want to go all in on Victor Scott again for a little while and see what it looks like because he's been tearing it up for Memphis. You have enough guys that you can kind of move around where you don't need to bring up an outfielder directly to play a bunch of center field and replace Siani. They could do it a different way and say, no, actually, Herrera coming up and him doing some DHing or some pinch hitting off the bench is valuable to us right now. I think that might be an unlikely option simply because they've had to get rid of or they've had to give up Nick Raposo because he was claimed by the Blue Jays on waivers. So they're kind of scrambling for catchers at Memphis anyway. But that's all my thoughts on that. By the time you're hearing this, you already probably know the answer. And so Sunday we'll talk more about what the fallout is from that situation. And as I'm doing this right now, it looks like the game is over. Memphis held on 3-2. Springfield held on in their game 8-2. That has just gone final as well. Max Radjic, 6 innings of 2-run baseball, allowed 2 solo home runs and nothing else. Former Cardinal minor league pitcher of the year from, I believe this past year, was Max Radjic. So good to see from him having a nice quality start down there. And Jimmy Crooks, our guy, 3 for 5 RBIs for the Double-A catcher. He'll be up before too long. I would have to imagine getting the promotion to Triple-A maybe before the end of the year. Catcher is a little bit of a weird spot because you've got to figure out who takes your spot behind you if you end up going up. But 2 home runs tonight for Jimmy Crooks in a 3 for 5 RBI outing. 9 home runs on the season. Actually recently just got on eBay a Jimmy Crooks autograph card. That was like $3, and I thought I just wanted to add it to my card collection, so I did for the price. And Palm Beach wins at 9-2. J.J. Weatherholt, the top pick, of course, that we've been updating you on, was on base twice. He went 1 for 3 with a base hit and a walk, which is all well and good. But yesterday, of course, the one day that I neglect to mention J.J. Weatherholt in the Down on the Farm segment, he had a really big game, 2 for 4 with 2 doubles and a couple of runs scored. So apologies for not mentioning that yesterday, but now I'm saying it here. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Let me know in the comments all your thoughts on everything Cardinals, and we'll see what happens on Sunday Night Baseball with Miles Michaelis on the hill, trying to go for the split at Wrigley. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.